Ah, computer books. Back when personal computers were considered a necessity, people would either purchase them at bookstores or loan them from a library. Today, computer books aren't as popular as they used to be, especially given how the internet exists. But for this episode, I want to give them the honor, particularly for one specific group of computer books. Back in the early 90s, a new category of computer software was popping onto the scene: modular screensavers. With it, of course, came what is now considered two rather obscure guidebooks about one of the most popular screensaver franchises: Cool Mac After Dark and Art of Darkness. Before we take a look at these beauties, let me give you a brief background. After Dark was a product of Berkeley Systems, a software company founded in 1985 by Wes Boyd and his father Larry, with his son's wife Joan Blades coming in as head of marketing later on. Before After Dark, Berkeley was known for their rather innovative accessibility products, such as Enlarge and Outspoken, as well as their first consumer product, Stepping Out. I covered these in more detail in my origin story episode, so go check it out if you haven't yet. But all of that changed in 1989, when the company released After Dark, the first commercially available modular screensaver product. At first, it wasn't a huge success upon launch, but it would slowly gain a cult following. This would encourage Berkeley Systems to release their follow-up, After Dark 2, the following year, which would quickly become a massive hit. With its success came a Windows version, followed by an expansion pack for the Mac version titled More After Dark, both released in 1991. From there, After Dark took off, and the niche but lucrative screensaver market was born. With After Dark skyrocketing in popularity, it made sense to write books about it, and two authors would step up to the plate, each with their own take on the most popular screensaver product. So let's start off with the first After Dark guidebook published, Cool Mac After Dark. Released in the summer of 1992 for $20 US, Cool Mac After Dark was part of the Cool Mac series of books, which also consisted of other Mac-related topics, such as QuickTime, animation, HyperCard stacks, games, and clip art. All of these books have one thing in common. They came with a free disc containing some content inside, which I'll get to later. The book was written by Ross Scott Rubin, who's probably best known for writing the PowerBook, as well as his contributions to Macintosh magazines like Mac User. The book, along with the rest of the Cool Mac series, was published by the Hayden Book Company, which was, at the time, an imprint of the computer publishing division of Prentice Hall, a then subsidiary of Paramount's Simon & Schuster. The front cover depicts an early 90s render of a personal computer, which looks more like a mix between a Mac 2 Si and a hard disk 20SC, while a variety of objects and animal clip art jump out of a CRT display. On the back, you've got a description of what the reader can do with this book, such as fly toasters, watch curious fish and sea creatures, buzz Berkeley, get creative, before it outlines all the things the reader can learn about in this book, which again I'll get to later. There are also what looks like totally irrelevant quotes. I especially like this one from Mallet. You can't touch this because it's too legit. So in other words, it's okay to touch it as long as it's a pirated copy. Already when you open this book, the first page full of text has a disclaimer stating that it's not authorized nor endorsed by Berkeley Systems. After that, we get some information about the author, followed by the credits, and then some special thanks to folks like Mike and the Karens, the author's parents, some guy named Jared, the robots of Mystery Science Theater, for some reason, and of course, Berkeley Systems. You also have a list of the conventions used, including icons that work pretty similar to that of the Dummies books. On the top right corner of almost every page is one of the more unique aspects of this book. It's essentially a flip movie of the book's Mr. Cool Mac Flippy guy, doing what looks like some cheap dance moves. A kind of pointless but neat bonus. After we get some more disclaimers, along with teasing a possible sequel that'll never come out, we come to the table of contents. Cool Mac After Dark consists of 8 chapters, spread across 4 sections. The first chapter, Dancing in the Dark, gives the reader a brief introduction to and history of screensavers, along with some detailed information about the content in this book. Much of the writing here has a bit of a humorous tone to it. In fact, it reminded me a lot of the Dummies books, which also had a similar sense of humor embedded into a reference guide. And considering that this book came out less than a year after the first Dummies book, it wouldn't surprise me if they took inspiration from that. One such example of said humor is in this chapter, where the author first described screensavers by comparing them to politicians. Yeah, that totally aged like wine. Stuff like this is spread throughout the entire book, and it can get a bit distracting at times. Thankfully, it's not as frequent like in the Dummies books, and you do get some good information and tips out of it. Moving on, the next two chapters focus on setup techniques. Chapter 2 is about configuring After Dark's global settings, including hot corners and setting up a password among other features. It also has a small tutorial on how to create a macro that would allow the user to activate After Dark with a simple keystroke, using a piece of software called Quick Keys. As the hotkey feature was exclusive to the Windows version at the time, this was a decent workaround, until After Dark 3 brought that feature to the Mac. The third chapter focuses on configuring the modules, including installation. And that's really about it. This takes us to the next two chapters, which make up the third section titled Post-Sunset. Chapter 4, the Berkeley batch, focuses on the included modules of After Dark 2, along with some of the basics of each module. Despite the majority of them having screenshots, albeit in grayscale, there's not much in terms of detail in the descriptions, aside from the humorous comments as mentioned earlier. Chapter 5, Mad to the Max, follows the same format as the previous chapter, only it covers the modules of More After Dark, with humor and all. I especially like this very short description of Confetti Factory. We then come to the final section of this book, Life Beyond Berkeley. This section consists of the final 3 chapters, and covers what is essentially the whole reason this book was made. Chapter 6, The Mod Squad, showcases the modules included on the Cool Mac After Dark disc, which, once again, I'll touch on more later. Chapter 7 focuses on the disc's bonus content, Deviant Darkness, which again I'll touch on later. And then we come to the final chapter, which is merely about troubleshooting. It's about as basic and short as you can get. There's also an appendix, which focuses on where to acquire different modules over the internet back in the day, whether it be through users groups, electronic bulletin boards, online services, and more. This is then followed by the index, like most, if not all, guidebooks have. But then afterwards, you're greeted with 12 blank pages. Not even an indicator that says they're intentionally left blank, just blank, before reaching the instructions on how to use the included disk. We also get a brief explanation on how this book was made, right down to what Mac computers and software were used. This brings us to the sleeve where the floppy disk would be. Unfortunately, I don't have the original disk at the moment, just this Mac Premierware disk that contains a bunch of screensavers. Thankfully, the internet has my back. Anyways, Cool Mac After Dark originally came with a 1.44 megabyte high-density cool disk, which contains some cool files inside. Hey, if this book wants to use the word cool a lot, might as well use it here. Upon inserting the disk, you'll be greeted with a Stuff It archive. The book provides instructions on how to extract the contents from the floppy to the hard drive, and can be found in both the introduction chapter and at the tail end of this book. Once extracted, you should see a Cool Disk folder, which consists of 3 subfolders: About the Modules, Cool Modules, and Deviant Darkness. About the Modules contains documentation for only 2 of the included screensavers, which I'll get to in a bit. The Cool Modules folder contains 17 screensaver modules, all of which are considered freeware or shareware. You've got your melting screensavers, Mr. Melty and Meltdown, a cheesy kaleidoscope module called K-Scope, and a bunch of other screensaver modules with relatively basic graphics. However, there are some special modules as well. One of them is Microbes, which works pretty similar to Can of Worms, with a bit of life mixed in, and has its own documentation found in the About the Modules folder. And then there's Reality, a screensaver that literally lets you control reality, including the gravity, distortion, and power. Oh boy, this ought to be good! Oh. So remember those crash screen simulators such as iPanic? That's basically this module in a nutshell. Upon activation, it creates a fake bomb screen, the one used before the Macintosh Classic came out. The controls for this module are totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter how you set them, you'll get the exact same result. However, there is a surprise that awaits once you wake up the computer. Try fooling your friends with that next time. Another unique module is Hallucinations, which essentially floods the computer screen with a scrolling parade of text, graphics, icons, and sounds from the main system files. This module would later get ported to Windows as part of the More After Dark package on the platform. You also have King's Cross Coke, a module based on the famous Coca-Cola billboard at King's Cross, a suburban area in Sydney, Australia. Spelled with an I, apparently. The module itself is pretty cool to look at, and you can even replace the default logo with any other picture of choice. It also includes documentation located in the About the Modules folder. You also have 2 QuickTime modules, Movies in the Dark and Aura QT. They both work as you'd expect, however they do offer a different set of features. For example, Movies in the Dark offers full screen playback, while Aura QT does not. Frost and Fire is a psychedelic type screensaver, and yeah, that's really all I can say to describe it. Like hallucinations, it was later included in a future version of After Dark, specifically version 3, for both Mac and Windows. But by far my personal favorite of the bunch has to be NetTrain. This module was created by Keith Statenfield, an Apple software engineer who also created another freeware module called Genchi, which may have inspired the more After Dark module Boris. This screensaver mostly relies on the AppleTalk data stream protocol for it to work properly. So if one Mac were connected to the same network as another Mac running the same screensaver, the train would presumably cross from one computer to another. Right below the locomotive would be the network username, which could be set either through the Chooser DA in System 6 or the Sharing Setup Control panel in System 7. The graphics for this screensaver are relatively basic, and it does work without a network connection, though it's not as exciting. Through the module's control panel, you can set the train's speed, number of cars, and even its size. If you set the size to large, it will reveal the name of the train on the locomotive. The Berkeley Systems Flyer, now transporting goods and serving the public on mighty wings. So that's the modules. Now let's take a look at Deviant Darkness, which, as mentioned before, consists of mostly bonus content for existing After Dark modules. For starters, you have a colorful Cool Mac logo for use with the logo module, in case you ever want to see that bounce around on your screen. There's also an alternative world map picture for the globe module from more After Dark. I personally think it looks better compared to the default one. You also have two animated Pix files for use with the Pix Player module. The first being Floppy Ears, which is basically a pre-rendered animation of the Energizer Bunny, and the second is the Mr. Cool Mac Flippy guy from the flipbook that I showed off earlier. But not all bonus content has to be for the existing modules. Landing Sequence, an animation of an early 90s CGI helicopter landing, was designed for use with the two QuickTime modules mentioned earlier. And lastly, there's a custom System 7 Savvy After Dark icon, which is kinda pointless given that there's already one for System 7, but hey, it exists, so there's that. Overall, the disc contents are okay for the most part. Not all the stuff on there is great, but I did get some enjoyment out of a few. As for the book itself, I also found it just fine. While it is nice that it references rather obscure software and provides a few good tips and tricks here and there, it lacks the detailed information for some modules, and like I said, wants to be more like a dummies book than a decent reference guide. So now let's move on to the second After Dark guidebook, Art of Darkness, released a few months after Cool Mac After Dark, also for $20 US. While the title may sound like the name of a book to Harry Potter witchcraft, Art of Darkness is actually about After Dark screensavers, as the book proclaims itself as, quote, the After Dark companion. What I have here is the Macintosh edition. There were possibly plans to make a Windows version of this book, but as far as I know, that never happened. The book was written by Erfurt Fenton, whose other works included Canned Art, clip art for the Macintosh, the Macintosh Font Book, the Weird Wide Web, the America Online Bible, and a contributing editing role for Macworld magazine. The book was published by Peach Pit Press, which was at the time an independent publisher owned by Ted Nace, and was headquartered in the same city as Berkeley Systems. The company is still in business today, now owned by Pearson, and has since relocated to San Francisco. Compared to the previous book, you'll notice right away some improvements. For one, the cover art looks a lot more professional, whereas the previous book reeked of early 90s cheese. This book is also notable for the official debut of the pre-rendered flying toasters, which would become more prominent in future After Dark products. Much like with Cool Mac, Art of Darkness also came with a free disc, containing new screensavers inside, which I'll get to later. But probably the most noteworthy mention was the fact that it was the first and only After Dark book to be officially endorsed by Berkeley Systems. I'll get to why that's important in a bit. The back cover gives a brief description of what this book is about. The ultimate guide to the ultimate Macintosh pastime, staring at screensavers. With plenty of exclamative points, such as weird factoids, historical insights, and useless trivia. And just like Cool Mac, there are bullet points of all the things you can read about and do in this book, which again I'll cover later. When you first open the book, you'll notice right away how better the visuals look compared to Cool Mac After Dark. Even the table of contents look more professional, and are actually separated by chapters rather than sections. The introduction starts off with what it was like to enter the Berkeley Systems building on Rose Street, as well as a brief history of the company and its core products, something that was not in the previous book. But much like Cool Mac, the rest of the introduction does briefly explain the contents of this book, which consists of 4 chapters. The first chapter, Screen Salvation Basics, gives the reader a brief introduction to screensavers and how they work, as well as covering the essentials of After Dark, including installation. It also contains a pretty amusing anecdote about an exchange between a consumer and a Berkeley Systems executive. But I'll save the best part for last. The second chapter, Modules on Parade, covers all of the modules in After Dark 2, minus the multi-module, as well as all the modules in More After Dark, in great detail. Going back to what I stated earlier, one of the major benefits of Berkeley Systems endorsing this book was the fact that it included far more information on the product and its modules. There's more detailed descriptions, history, behind-the-scenes tidbits, and amusing anecdotes about the various modules, making it a far more interesting and entertaining read. Like, did you know that the Nocturnes module caused a raccoon to try to get into an After Dark user's house? Or did you know that when Berkeley Systems contacted Glenn, a contest winner for his work on the Mowing Man module, his wife had to call him in from mowing the lawn? Seriously, that's not a joke. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still some form of humor in this book, but the author knew how to balance it out. The only time where it really gets lengthy is the part where they somehow combine flying toasters with Greek mythology. In other words, the author managed to combine high culture with pop culture. Pretty impressive. The chapter also covers the modules from the included disc, which again I'll touch on later, as well as a selection of freeware and shareware modules, such as Off the Air and Spinning Bowtie. One thing that is disappointing about this book is the lack of screenshots for many of the modules. Cool Mac After Dark, for the amount of problems it has, at least had a bountiful amount of screenshots for the majority of the modules covered. However, there are 2 pages of full-color screenshots in between pages 54 and 55, although it's only for a select batch of modules, mostly from the Art of Darkness screensavers. Moving on, we come to the third chapter, Multi-Module Cookbook, which centers around, what else? The multi-module. Unlike in Cool Mac where they just glance it over, Art of Darkness goes into a lot of detail on what the multi-module is, how to use it, and how to create templates from it. It even talks about some of the limitations. For example, in After Dark 2, you could not create multi-module templates without tampering with the module settings themselves. The way around it? By duplicating the modules, and then adjusting the settings for that module. Granted, this would be corrected in After Dark 3, where modules can have their own settings in a multi-module template, but that wouldn't be a thing for about a couple years, so yeah. This chapter also contains various multi-module recipes, hence why it's a cookbook. Some of these are pretty creative, such as Clockwork Vertigo, Psychedelic Toasters, NBA, and God knows how many Boris templates there are. Some of these ideas were eventually adapted into actual modules for future iterations of After Dark, for better or worse. We then come to the fourth and final chapter, Advanced Module Modification. Now, before I go on, one other thing you might notice at the beginning of each chapter is the interaction between Mowing Man and Boris. As the reader goes through each chapter, the lawn tractor gets closer and closer until Boris inevitably runs away. But don't you worry, he'll get his totally twisted revenge in the future. Anyways, this chapter contains some advanced tips and tricks, such as changing the order of the modules, randomizing multi-modules, and adding custom sounds using the QuickTime modules and the multi-module, before the sounder module became a thing, of course. It also taught the reader how to modify existing modules using Apple's resource editor ResEdit. So in a way, Berkeley Systems did encourage modding, but only for personal use. The final set of pages afterwards show off the resources used for this book, which is then quickly followed by the usual index. This is then followed by an advertisement for other Peach Pit computer books, as well as an order form, because why not? So that's Art of Darkness. Overall, it's a huge improvement over Cool Mac in terms of information and balancing out the humor, but the absence of many screenshots is a bit of a downer. But hey, I'll take that over an attempt at being After Dark for Dummies any day. But as mentioned before, this book also contains a floppy disk, located on the very back of the book in a clear sleeve. However, unlike Cool Mac, it's not a high-density disk. Rather, it's an 800K double-density disk, allowing for backwards compatibility with older Macs, such as the Macintosh Plus. Upon inserting the disk, you'll be greeted with 10 screensaver modules, all of which were developed by the Berkeley Systems team. You also have a README document and an After Dark updater, the latter of which updates the software to 2.0V, giving it full System 7 compatibility as well as support for 68040-based Macs like the Quadra. The modules themselves mostly consist of artistic screensavers, such as Fractal Forest, Pearls, Spin Brush, Strange Attractors, and Sunburst. You also have the special screensaver modules, starting with Blackboard, which is basically just that, stuff being drawn on a blackboard. The user could choose between 2 different types, Underachiever and Einstein, and can also adjust the amount of errors, the neatness, and the number of lines using the sliders.
Oops.
Major Metaphysical Appliances is essentially a vertical variation of the flying toasters, except all of the toasters are replaced with refrigerators, with an occasional washing machine here and there. You also have the obligatory QuickTime module, Movies Till Dawn, which was later bundled with the Macintosh version of After Dark 3. And then there's Boglins. The book and the module describe it as a, quote, cross between Santa Claus and a pickle. However, I would argue that it looks more like a stress toy that jingled all the way into a microwave. If you're looking for a bunch of fart sounds, twangs, and explosions, then this is definitely the module for you. And finally, there's Jack Eastman's original Flying Toasters prototype, dubbed the Proto Toasters. It functions the same as the regular Flying Toasters module we all know and love, except it doesn't have any of the sound nor the detailed graphics. Regardless, it's a fun piece of history to look at. All of these modules, minus Movies Till Dawn and Proto Toasters, would eventually make its way into more After Dark for Windows, albeit with some module names changed. Major Metaphysical Appliances became Ohm Appliances, and Blackboard became Einstein, with the Underachiever mode strangely left out in this version. Maybe they were saving that for the Simpsons edition.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so I said I would save the best for last, so let's circle back to the first chapter of this book. As mentioned before, this chapter contains a pretty amusing anecdote, which tells the story of an exchange between a consumer and a Berkeley Systems executive. Back in late 1989, during After Dark's first year on the market, Berkeley Systems issued out a mailing offer, giving Mac users a 40% discount on After Dark, originally priced at $40 back in the day. The offer was mainly targeted at those who already owned a Screensaver product, as mentioned in the offer's message. However, one customer, who went by the name of Mr. X, took this offer a little too far. He returned it back to the company with a written note, insisting that he, quote, didn't want to do anything more than blank his screen. He also didn't believe that people need to be reminded that one's computer was currently running, and demanded why Berkeley doesn't also offer a simple screen blanker. Nicholas Rush, a then executive at Berkeley Systems, replied back to him with a personal letter, dated January 11th, 1990. He not only reiterates on Mr. X's remarks, but he also says that After Dark does offer a module similar to a standard screen blanker called Fadeaway. He then goes on to compare the screensaver variety in After Dark to having a closet full of different clothes, and going out for nice dinners instead of just a bowl of gruel and a handful of dietary supplements. He then ends the letter by hooking Mr. X up with a special offer, a 50% discount on a yet-to-be-released update to After Dark, version 1.1. Shortly after receiving the letter, Mr. X grudgingly sent his $20 check in the mail, along with another written note, stating that he wasn't one of those customers that wanted more. He also suspected that many of the people in his workplace shared the same opinion as he did. They didn't want to be distracted by dynamic screensavers while working. And yeah, he does have a point on that. Nevertheless, his check was cashed, and soon after received his copy of After Dark 1.1. But when he went to use it, he discovered a problem. The fadeaway module didn't actually make his screen go totally black. And again, he has a point. Even at 0%, the fadeaway module leaves a slight glow on the screen, even on a black and white Mac, where you're just left with a scrolling dot across the screen. Needless to say, he found this issue unacceptable, and returned his copy 2 weeks later with another written note, not only complaining about this flaw, but also demanded a refund, and called out Berkeley Systems for being stubborn on this matter. Ultimately, Mr. X did get his refund, along with another personal note from Nick Rush, dated February 5th, 1990. Nick not only apologized for the customer's dissatisfaction, but he also gave him a special little gift. A modified copy of After Dark that contains only 2 modules, Starry Night and a basic screen blanker simply titled Mr. X. It's like having a consumer send in a complaint about glitches in a software product or video game, and then having the product modified to their specifications sent back to you by a company executive. Obviously that would never happen, but still. And to put the bow on it, Mr. X returned Nick's letter with a written note expressing his satisfaction, and he even returned his refund check. In hindsight, the way a software company got a customer to try out a product they weren't interested in was pretty genius. Sure, not everybody is going to be in the same ballpark, and people like Mr. X are entitled to their opinion on screensavers. But at the same time, the majority of people do like dynamic visuals, which would only get more and more creative as the product got more and more popular. This kind of exchange also happened before the internet as we know it was a thing, so if this situation were to happen now, they probably would have bragged about it on social media. But really think about it. If you were given an offer by a company executive a pretty good discount to an unreleased version of a product that you have no interest in, how would you react? Regardless, it's interesting to see such an amusing exchange between a consumer and a company executive. Here's to hoping that Mr. X disk is still out there. Probably not, but if it is, it might as well be considered the holy grail of Macintosh software. Nick Rush would go on record to say that, ironically, the biggest complaints he gets from After Dark users is that they waste too much time playing with it. And yeah, I can totally see why. But Mr. X's complaints must have had an impact in some way. 4 years after the exchange, Berkeley Systems released After Dark 3, which added a new module called Blank Screen Only. It essentially works the same way the Mr. X module did. Blank the screen. Overall, a happy ending to practically everyone involved. Well, unless you want to dig into what happened afterwards, but that's a story for another time. So there you have it, the first After Dark book ever published, and the first After Dark book ever endorsed. Are they considered literary masterpieces? No, but they are both unique in their own right. Out of the 2 books I've covered here, I liked Art of Darkness more, but I can also appreciate Cool Mac After Dark for what it was trying to do for newcomers. Now, I typically don't do book reviews on the show, but for something like this, I kind of found myself fascinated by them, especially given the fact that these books have literally fallen into obscurity. The goal of my show is to unleash the uncommon, and these After Dark guidebooks are a perfect example of this, discovering an unknown piece of tech history. Now, there is a lot more to the history of this beloved Screensaver franchise than just the guidebooks, and I'll be talking more about it in another episode. But in the meantime, I'm gonna go and binge read some more reference guides, while I watch some dogs fly across my screen. Good luck trying to figure that one out. Look, I still think turning the flying toasters into toaster trains is a clever idea, don't you think? Yeah, that's what I thought.